11 people find themselves in a place unknown to them. It turns out that they do not remember anything about what happened to them. The group of people consists of ordinary working-class people. Only one of the men is a former mercenary who has a medieval weapon. At that moment, a small fairy named Izel arrives and informs them that the people will be ruled by a master who is the god of the place. The magical creature warns the people about the upcoming battle. The former mercenary starts talking rudely to Izel and starts threatening her with death. At that moment, the magical creature kills the insolent man and shows all the other participants what will happen to them if they do not obey orders. The surviving humans are in shock at what is happening. A magic portal is activated and the fairy informs them that they need to go into battle. The main character named Han asks the girl to give them weapons. Izel pulls out her computer and informs the master of his warrior's request. The protagonist tells everyone that they have to fight so that they don't die. A squad of ordinary humans had time to arm themselves and enter the portal. A squad of ordinary people managed to arm themselves and enter the portal. Han and his squad appear in a large deserted field, and at that moment they are attacked by goblins. Unfortunately, most of the squad ran away to try to find a way out and save their lives. The protagonist and a girl named Jenna were forced to fight the goblin squad. The world that Han is in is a mobile game. The protagonist loves to play this fascinating application. The man has achieved great success, but on another mission to clean up the area, Han and his virtual squad came across a monster that moved the man in the game. From that moment, the guy is forced to fight for his life in his favorite game. In the process of fighting the goblins, Hanu's arm is cut off. Jenna is greatly concerned about the condition of her new ally, but the man claims that when they return to the waiting room, his arm will reappear. The protagonist manages to get through one floor, but loses 3 members of his squad. The next day, Han and Jenna decide to train hard on a special field for training martial abilities in order to get out of this dangerous place. The girl realizes that her ally is strong and experienced, which is why Jenna decides to remain friends with him and continue to develop. After 3 days, the master entered the game again. All free time, the protagonists devoted to training on their skills and achieved success. Suddenly, another call for new heroes begins. This time only 3 people appeared. At this point, the master decides to open a portal for his warriors to go to the 2nd floor for battles with dangerous monsters. The 2nd floor was successfully passed through and all the people were still alive. During the fight, the newbie warriors were useless and very scared. For 3 days, the protagonists continued to train and improve their combat skills. Unfortunately, the newcomers did not visit the training field and did not develop in any way. The portal is activated again and the troop gets to the 3rd floor to fight dangerous monsters. The protagonists manage to quickly clear the floor of enemies. Jenna and Han begin to condemn their useless allies. Upon returning to the waiting room, the master decides to perform a synthesis of the heroes. It turns out that the power of one of the fighters can be transferred to another person, but the warrior whose experience will be transferred will die. The strength of the newcomers who performed poorly during the battle was transferred to the protagonists. Ies. Jenna and the remaining surviving newcomer named Aaron decide to train more and improve their skills to pass all the floors and be useful to the master so he won't use their power in the fusion. After some time, the master decides to build a forge to create and improve weapons. Han decides to talk to the fairy to learn more about the master and the outside world. Suddenly, the protagonist admits that he is a professional gambler nicknamed Loki. Izel is perplexed and checks the information about the legendary user of the game. It turns out that Han didn't lie to her and the girl asked the man for his autograph. Suddenly, the fairy begins to worry about Loki's base. The protagonist had a developed account and a huge number of professional warriors. Han decides not to think about his account, but to try with all his might to get out of the game. That evening, the man, along with Jenna, gathers materials to create a new weapon. In the end, the protagonist manages to create a new weapon for himself and his allies. After a while, Han's squad gets to the 4th floor. During the battle, Aaron was able to show his skills, and eventually the master added the guy to the list of chosen warriors. After a few days, the master decided to donate to the game and improve the living conditions of his heroes. The summoning portal activates again and new people enter the waiting room. Izel starts looking for people who have skills as carpenters, blacksmiths, and cooks. It turns out that all buildings have to be supplied by the people who were summoned. After being distributed by skill, the people who didn't have unique abilities were sent to the first floor to test their combat abilities. After a tough screening, the survivors and main characters went to a new cafeteria. Jenna and Han had been eating unleavened potatoes the whole time. The man who volunteered to be the chef did a terrible job preparing the dish. At this point, the main character goes into a rage and appoints a girl named Chloe as a chef. After a while, the new chef prepared excellent potato dishes, which were enjoyed by all the participants of the game. In the process of dinner, Han distributes all the duties for the survivors and goes to train. On the training field, a man was waiting for 3 new recruits named Zid, Hansen, and Dika, who wanted to learn martial arts and fight monsters. Han decides to take on the task of training the young recruits and make them his allies. A few days later, Jenna becomes perplexed and doesn't understand why the master doesn't send them to the 5th floor. It turns out that every 5th level is a boss. Dangerous monsters and unpredictable challenges await the warriors there. Professional blacksmiths and artisans appeared in the game user's squad. Since then, warriors do not need good armor and weapons. The master decides to activate the portal that leads to the 5th floor. The main squad is sent to explore the floor. While exploring the mission, the main character realizes that they will have to defend themselves against a huge number of goblins for 30 minutes. In the midst of a brutal battle, the squad loses Zid and Hansen. Afterward, Eren panics and his strength stats plummet. Han realizes that they need to change locations to hold out and withstand the goblin attacks. Eventually, Eren is badly injured, but Jin and Han manage to climb a hill and hold off the monsters. Suddenly, the protagonist is wounded and begins to rapidly lose health. At this point, the man goes into a rage and activates a new ability called Berserk. Khan manages to quickly dispatch the enemies and the protagonists return to the base. After passing the 5th floor, it is possible for the player to complete daily challenges that require mining, materials, and hunting beasts. After a few days, all of a sudden, a wizard decides to buy a rookie set that costs $50. The user of the game decided to buy a set of summoning unique heroes. The wizard was lucky; he got a squad of mercenaries who had a rank of 3 levels, and the protagonists and the rest of the inhabitants had a rank of 1 level. Jenna meets one of the members of the mercenary squad named Adis, and the girls begin to get to know each other. Suddenly, Adis turns out to be a good-natured and pleasant girl. After a few hours, the mercenaries began to rampage and behave horribly. They threatened the surviving residents of the waiting room in every possible way and took the newcomers without a second thought to use diffusion. The protagonist tries to stop a squad of bandits, but one of the dangerous mercenaries attacks Khan, but Gemma manages to distract the intruder. To resolve the issue of leadership in the city, the protagonist proposes to the leader of the bandits to fight a duel. The opponents decide to put their lives on the line. The one who loses voluntarily gives all his strength and skills to the man who wins. During the duel, the protagonist activates the Berserk skill and leonizes his opponent. At this point, a group of bandits try to stop Han, but Izel stops them. Then the villains dare to attack the ferry, and the magical creature effortlessly kills the wizard's valuable heroes. Khan defeated the bandit, and the man gave the protagonist his accumulated experience. Also, the benevolent Adis became a member of Khan's team. The protagonist realizes that they are getting close to passing the 10th floor. Han thinks they need to create a second combat team, with Adis at the head of it. Khan is looking for recruits who will be worthy to join the fighting squad. The man finds a boy named Asher, who previously worked as a loader for mercenaries. The young man has some sword skills because he has spent a lot of time with professional mercenaries. The next morning, the protagonist summons everyone who is able to use weapons and kill monsters. The man decides to draw lots to decide whose squad the participants will join. In Han's squad, Jenna and Eren remained, and in Ada's squad there were 2 new recruits. The protagonist's squad easily manages to kill all the monsters on the 7th floor of the tower. Upon arriving in the waiting room, Han learns that the master has once again purchased a donation and is going to make a call for high-class fighters. At this point, the man asks to draw lots again to determine which team the new members of the survival game will join. The protagonist gets a girl named Yoka, who can use fire magic. And a knight named Roderick is added to Ada's squad. The protagonist's squad plans to test Yoka's abilities on the 4th floor of the tower, but suddenly the wizard sends the squad to the 8th floor. It turns out that the wizard is not of high level and is unable to protect and heal allies. The protagonist decides to hide in the forest and use the girl's strongest spell. Han enters the berserk state and holds off a huge troop of goblins. At this time, Yoka reads a spell and the remaining squad protects the precious mage. The protagonist manages to gather a large number of enemies in one place and the mage releases his projectile into the monsters. With the help of teamwork and Yoka's magical abilities, the squad manage to deal with the enemies and get a worthy reward for the level passed. Suddenly, the mage faints and the squad realizes that the girl has too much mana consumption while using magic. Han thought for a long time about how to change tactics to fully utilize Yoka's magic. Late that night, Han met with Eren and Jenna. The man states that they will have to master fire resistance. They will have to burn their bodies to the point where they can no longer feel the temperature of the magician's fire magic. After that, the protagonist reveals that in the new tactic the squad will have to defend the mage, that Yoka had time to use her destructive magic against the enemies. All their free time, both teams are practicing hard. After a while, the day came when the teams went to the 10th floor to complete a task. It turns out that the squads have entered a full-fledged city with a huge number of peaceful NPCs. The protagonists realize that this city is the one that was on the 5th floor, but still not destroyed. The two squads manage to find each other and discuss a plan of action. It turns out that level 10 is connected to all the previous levels, and using the clues, Han managed to devise a plan that would help the warriors win. The protagonist's squad managed to find a large squad of reinforcements. Together with them, the guys went to the gates of the city to help the first team. Han realizes that cruel goblins have organized an ambush deep in the forest. The protagonists decide to get ahead of the enemy and attack them. In the end, the warriors manage to defend the city from the goblins. Unfortunately, the coveted congratulations on passing the mission still did not appear. At that moment there was a server error. Everything around Han froze and an unfamiliar voice asked him to look back. When the protagonist turned around, the man saw the mysterious man who had sent him into the game. A gloomy priest appears next to the mysterious person, claiming to be waiting for the protagonist. After the strangers vaporize, the game returns to normal and the connection is restored. When Han regains consciousness, the man orders his friends to flee inside the city. It turns out that the Grim Priest is the most legendary foe who can reanimate the dead in the guise of the undead. At that moment, all the dead enemies and allies turn into horrible creatures and attack the city. The protagonist orders the squad to defend the city, and he himself went in search of the priest to kill him. Han managed to find a cruel priest on the edge of the 10th floor map. During the brutal fight, the protagonist is badly hurt and two allies have already died. The man uses the berserk skill and kills the main enemy from his last strength. The protagonist falls to the ground and bleeds to death, but at the last moment the mission is completed and the guys are transported to the waiting room.